Let's talk about decision making for a bit. I'm curious, would you agree that the higher up you get in an organization, the more you as a leader are judged on the quality of your decisions, and less so about like the hours or how hard you work?
Well, at a very high level, I believe that is true. But it is also true that you can only arrive at those high quality decisions by the hard work that you put in. On a surface, or from an external perspective, those decisions look simple at the end of it, but there's so much work that has gone behind the background to come to that high quality decision.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to Run the Numbers, the podcast that you just really want to give 5 stars right now. You do. And it's okay. Please do it. What follows is a conversation with my friend Kapil Agrawal, the CFO at Outschool. This guy is a marketplace maniac, folks. This guy is the man with the plan when it comes to take rates. I think my middle name is actually Take Rates. My parents just didn't put it on my birth certificate. Kapil takes us through his time as a leader at Uber. He went through quite the wild ride there where he changed Uber's take rate, believe it or not, and how they thought about using discounts and promotions as a way to onboard customers without sacrificing long-term margins. So we go deep into the unit economics of Uber during the time he was there. Then we transition to talk about the story of Poshmark. That's a roller coaster. They transitioned from deep in the red, burning cash, to profitable at IPO. He takes us through the capital allocation decisions that allowed them to get to that point. This guy is a public market CFO who's seen some stuff. He also takes us through the North Star metrics that they were trying to optimize for during his time at Poshmark. And now he's at Outschool, one of the hotter marketplaces out there. He speaks to when you want to lean on subscription modeling and when you want to lean into a model that's predicated on transactions, similar to an Uber or Poshmark, the advantages and disadvantages of both. So we debate pure play models and when it's okay, and even encourage to try to do both things at the same time. And Kapil is a smart guy when it comes to decision making. You know, we talk about the higher you get in an organization, the more you're judged actually by the quality of your decisions, not the number of hours or how hard you work. But at the same time, you still need to put in those hours and you still need to work hard in order to make the right decision. So it's kind of a loop there. You're really going to enjoy this episode. He's a deep thinker and he's also seen some of the most incredible marketplaces at play. All this and much, much more after you give us 5 stars and a word from our sponsors. Let me tell you a banking story that starts in Tokyo and ends right here. MUFG. The M stands for Mitsubishi, the largest bank in Japan with nearly $3 trillion in assets globally. And they've assembled a purpose-built banking team to bring its global capabilities to the heart of the tech ecosystem. MUFG is a global powerhouse in many sectors and among the most active lenders to large US tech companies. They've gone big to support growth in middle market stage companies in North America and Europe. What I love most about these guys, though, is the team. Nearly 50 strong, smart, responsive, insightful, and possibly the most experienced mid-market tech lenders on the planet. Many of you know this because you've already worked with them. This is global sophistication meets operator-level understanding, a truly different approach. VC-backed, PE-backed, public companies, revenues from $40 million on up. We're talking about more than money. We're talking about momentum. Ready to transform your financial strategy? Email Group Head Bob Blee at bblee@us.mufg.jp. That's bblee@us.mufg.jp. Tell him CJ sent you. MUFG, empowering a brighter future for the tech ecosystem. Well, if you've listened to this podcast before, you definitely know that I think it's cool to be a fan of business. I'm obsessed with researching how the best companies operate and specifically how they manage their money. And I've learned that a company's financial stack can make the difference between world domination and obscurity. That's why I want to tell you about Brex, because I want you to rule the world. Brex is an impressive financial services and software company that has grown immensely since it was founded in 2017. In just the last year alone, Brex accelerated customer acquisition by 50%, with 91% growth in enterprise customers. And there's good reason that over 30,000 companies from startups to enterprises have flocked to Brex. Brex offers the world's smartest corporate card on a full stack global platform that is everything CFOs need to manage their finances on an elite level. Plus, they offer modern banking and treasury, as well as intuitive expenses and accounting automation, bill pay, and travel. Wow, it's all on the roster whenever you need it. Brex grows with you. CFOs tell me all the time that Brex makes it easy to control spend before it happens, automate annoying tasks, and optimize their finances. Because listen, at the end of the day, Brex helps them make every dollar count. So if you're a fan of smart businesses too, check out Brex at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. Trust isn't earned, it's demanded. Whether you're a startup founder navigating your first audit or a seasoned security professional scaling your GRC program, proving your commitment to security has never been more critical or complex. That's where Vanta comes in. Businesses use Vanta to establish trust by automating compliance needs across over 35 frameworks, like SOC 2 and ISO 27001. Centralized security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risk. Vanta not only saves you time, it can also save you money. A new IDC white paper found that Vanta customers achieve $535,000 per year in benefits, and the platform pays for itself in just 3 months. Join over 9,000 global companies like Atlassian, Cora, and Factory, who use Vanta to manage risk and improve security in real time. For a limited time, our audience gets $1,000 off Vanta at vanta.com/metrics. That's vanta.com/metrics for $1,000 off. Kapil, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast.
Thank you, CJ. Looking forward to it. Thank you for inviting me.
You've developed and refined amazing business models at Uber for Uber Eats, Uber Pool, and Poshmark, and now you're the CFO of Outschool. I mean, you've worked at all these dynamic companies with business models that I think like listeners would salivate to dig into. So I'm really excited to have you on the pod. I was thinking maybe we could do some questions on Uber and your experience there, if that works for you.
Sounds good, CJ. Looking forward to it. It was definitely an amazing experience and looking forward to talking more about it.
So a hot topic lately are discounts and promotions. And I know a lot of people listening right now are probably navigating business models where they're trying to think of what levers they have at their disposal to make the business run faster. If I have it right, at Uber, you worked with discounting and promotions as levers for customer growth, right?
Yeah, I was responsible for the entire pricing strategy for Uber's core product and also for Uber Eats and Uber Pool. And in that experience, I was responsible not only for think about the pricing on the rider and driver side, but also how we think about promotions and incentives both for drivers and riders.
I always wondered how they came up with the prices for it. And correct me if I'm wrong. It's dynamic pricing, right?
Yeah, so it has both component. It has a base pricing, and on top of that base pricing, you put the dynamic pricing.
Okay.
So I think the most interesting part was how you come up with the base pricing as well. And to come to the base pricing, we'll go to each city, we'll take 10 to 20 trips in cabs and think about what should be the right pricing for us in terms of per mile and per minute if we have to offer it on taxi. And then we'll discount it by around 30 to 40% to provide the right customer value. And that's how we'll come to the base pricing for each city that will enter. So that will be the base pricing. And the search was more dynamic pricing, which will sit on top of the base pricing, which is more about balancing your supply and demand for a very local market.
That's amazing. So you would, and people love the tactics, you would put boots on the ground and they would take 20, 30, 40, 50 trips to figure out the first base. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. They will take those rides and then they'll provide the data to my team, and then we'll come with the base pricing. And for the base pricing, let me correct it. It's a base pricing for a longer term. If we want to create a long-term sustainable business in that particular market, we'll come to the base pricing. And on top of that base pricing, we'll also introduce some discounting in the near term to kickstart the flywheel for that particular market.
Got it. So the discounts were a lever to kickstart it, because a lot of companies who are running a two-sided model have this cold start problem of how do I incentivize one side? Because it's like you're kind of jumping out of an airplane and trying to build the wings on the way down. And so what I'm curious, Kapil, is if there are risks in acquiring customers with promotions, like do you have in the back of your mind, this is just a temporary thing? Could they potentially always expect the services to be at this price?
Yeah, so there are a few things I would say, CJ. If I take a little bit higher level here, the first thing that we need to be sure about that we are providing an amazing value to the customers. And we knew that if our prices are around 30 to 40% cheaper than the taxi services, there's an inherent value in our product, which are liked and appreciated by all our customers. And also it was very evident in our data, especially the retention data, because we have a hockey stick retention curves. A lot of the time for consumer companies, you'll see that the retention are around 20 to 30%. But in our case, our retention rates were more than 100%. The customer keeps coming back to the platform and take more and more rides on the platform. And that was amazing. And once you have that great product market fit and amazing retention, then you are much more confident that you have a right unit economics and you want to invest to gain the market share. And that was our strategy that, hey, we have an amazing product and we want to create a high network effect. And for us to do that, we were comfortable in investing in promotions and incentives in the shorter term. But we also knew that eventually we had to pull back those promotions and incentives in each of the market as we have created that flywheel. And now there's a good dynamics between supply and demand in that particular market.
It sounds like you're pretty passionate about looking at the unit economics.
Yes, that's, I would say that as a CFO, that should be your number one job, that you have the right unit economics and sustainable for the longer term.
And do you look at unit economics in a short-term basis and then a long-term basis, like a target, maybe contribution per transaction?
So from my perspective, CJ, it's very important that you keep a close eye on your long-term unit economics. Mm-hmm. You need to be very, very sustainable. And at Uber, our take rate initially was around 20%. We are taking 20% from the drivers for each of the transaction. And we knew that 20% take rate was not sustainable for a long-term unit economics that we wanted to achieve for our business. And we eventually changed our take rate from 20% to 25%. So that was very, very important for us. But also, when we think about in the short term itself, when I gave you an example that we had a base pricing and we are discounting the rides for that base pricing, we are very, very clear to the cities that in the 9 month, you have to let go of all the promotions so that you eventually return to the base pricing. And we were comfortable. We'll come up with the model that how much cash you'll burn as you reach from 0 to 9 months and you take away your discounts eventually. Also, it was very important, CJ, that we are very clear with our customers as well and in communication to the customers as well that you are getting this discount for this specific ride and this specific discount. So we are not promising those customers that these discounts are forever. So it's also very important to set that expectation correctly with your customers as well.
Just tying it back to SaaS, one of the most powerful things I learned as a CFO is it's always a better value proposition to give away a one-time discount. Like, listen, I'll give you 2 months free rather than giving a discount on the SaaS fee that they're going to pay on the annuity stream going forward.
That's correct, CJ. And it's exactly what we did at Uber. We did not compromise on our base pricing. We knew that this is the base pricing that we need for a longer term, and we are comfortable giving the discounts and incentives to both our riders and the drivers in the short term and burn the capital to gain the market share and kickstart that flywheel in each of the cities that we entered.
Maybe an overly specific question, but how did you know 9 months was the right period in which to basically claw back to even?
Yeah, that's a great question, CJ. And eventually in the first market, we did not know what is the right period, and we are running more of an experiment. And some markets went into profitability, or we were able to pull back those discounts in 6 months. Some market took more than 12 months or so. And also it varies from competition to competition in different cities. But as we gathered more and more data, when we were able to launch to more than 50s or hundreds of the cities, at that point of time, by looking into those markets, we knew that 6 to 9 months was around approximate amount of time when we are able to claw back those promotions from the rider side.
Got it. And were these promotional launch strategies pretty similar when you looked across the initiatives for Uber Eats and then Uber Pool, or were they like completely different depending on what service you're providing?
Yeah, it was very, very different, CJ. And the reason for that is the products were very, very different. In Uber X, we had the large market share, and
Right.
we were in most of the cities, we were around 70 to 80% market share. And because of that strength, we are able to reach that profitability target much sooner. While in Uber Eats, we are not the first player in the market. We had Grubhub, which was a large public company at that point of time. We are also competing with other players like Instacart and DoorDash of the world. So definitely in that particular case, because of higher competition and the competition's willingness to pour more capital, we were comfortable in delaying that 9 months to a longer time. And similarly for Uber Pool, it was a very different product. And Uber Pool, we are thinking more of a long-term strategy, because ultimately our goal at that point was to bring prices as low as possible so that you don't need your own personal vehicle and we can compete with the public transportation. And if we have to go into that particular world, we are not satisfied that our prices were 30 to 40% cheaper than taxi. We wanted to continue to bring it down and down. And to go into that particular world, we wanted Uber Pool product to be successful. And because of that, we are comfortable in investing in that product for a longer period of time. So in short, in Uber X, we had around 9 months to come to let go of those promotions. But in Uber Eats, we had to depend on how we are competing with other players in the market. And in Uber Pool, it was a long-term strategy, and we were investing for a long period of time to make Uber Pool product work. And that was a fantastic strategy from my perspective.
That's amazing. That was just brilliant, because to play it back, you basically had 3 different variables that you had to form fit depending on the product line. So you had your target unit economics by product, you had the competition set by product line, and then you also had the total addressable market. Like the taxi market is a different total addressable market than, say, like are people going to stop taking the bus or the subway?
Yes, that's exactly correct. And CJ, and that's what we are seeing in some of our markets. For example, if you think about city like San Francisco, a lot of people earlier, they may be comfortable taking more of a public transportation or also owning their own vehicles. But as Uber X and Uber Pool continue to become cheaper and cheaper, people were not buying vehicles and people were not taking public transportation. In fact, there were data that a lot of people did not even have the driving license much later in their lifespan because of comfortable and lower pricing of Uber.
That's how you know you move the market. You fundamentally move user behavior in terms of how they go about their daily lives. Am I going to get a license or not?
That's exactly correct, CJ.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Here's a question. Do you feel like you're wasting time and energy on contract renewals or tracking shadow IT spend or, this is a bad one, explaining rising software costs to the board? Truth is, traditional spend management is broken. That's where Tropic comes in. Tropic is an intelligent spend management solution that consolidates your spend data and processes into one unified offering, enabling insights and decisive action. It doesn't just show you where the problems are, it helps you solve them. From spotting hidden optimization opportunities like duplicative spend to automating those painful procurement workflows to giving you the best market data that turns every vendor negotiation in your favor. I'm a Tropic customer myself. I've been using them for over a year, and I love their price checks. They allow me to see if I'm getting a fair market deal instantly. And I'm proud to say that I am no longer using my email as our company's contract repository. I've got every document and renewal neatly organized in my Tropic portal. Isn't it time to turn spend management into your competitive advantage? Visit tropicapp.io/mostlymetrics to see what's possible when intelligence drives your decisions. tropicapp.io/mostlymetrics. Does your revenue recognition process feel like a total guessing game? Step right up and pick a card, any card. You're not alone. Revenue accounting is getting more complex, especially with subscription models, usage-based billing, and evolving compliance standards. Woohoo! RightRev is here to help you gain control over your revenue accounting. RightRev automates the revenue recognition process from end to end. Whether it's multi-element arrangements, subscription renewals, or complex usage-based contracts, RightRev takes care of it all. That means fewer spreadsheets, fewer errors, and more time for your team to focus on growth. Customers like Snowflake, Logic Monitor, and Epicor chose RightRev to manage their high volume and complex revenue accounting. CFOs can see the bigger picture faster without being held up by their team's reporting nightmares. You know me, I'm a business model fanatic. And don't get me wrong, I love all the evolutions. We've got self-serve revenue, usage-based revenue, and now even success-based revenue, you name it. But that doesn't make it any easier for us being counters on the back end to keep score. RightRev is like a cheat code for staying ahead of revenue complexities. So you're ready to transform your revenue accounting? Visit RightRev.com to schedule a demo. That's RightRev.com and tell them your boy CJ sent you. RightRev, modern revenue recognition simplified. Oh yeah. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report with accuracy? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built solutions for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks with minimal IT involvement, enabling seamless collaboration across your organization's key financial workflows. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unmatched scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Visit planful.com/metrics to see how you can elevate your team this year with Planful. They will hook you up. It is planful.com/metrics. Tell them your boy CJ sent you. Planful.com/metrics. What was the North Star metric you were trying to optimize for during your time at Uber? And now that I know more about it, the question may be phrased differently. I'm guessing there may have been a North Star metric that was different by product line.
Yes, you're right, CJ. So there were North Star metric which were different for different product line, but within different product line, the overall North Star metric were different, but there were also North Star metric for each city and location. And let me illustrate that. For example, for Uber X business, our North Star metric was weekly trips taken by the riders, because it's a good combination of existing rider, new rider, how satisfied those riders are with your product, retention, etc. So it's a good combination of all those metrics. But also, we were very focused on the market share that we have in each of our city. And we were not disclosing it externally, CJ, but internally we were very, very focused that for each of the city, we need to have 70 to 80, north of 70% market share. And whenever our market share was lower than 70%, we'll go with aggressive discounts and promotions to bring it back to 70% plus. And that, I think, worked very well for us to continue to gain market share and continue to compete really well in each of those cities.
70%, 70. That's really ambitious.
That was ambitious. And we were never satisfied if we had a lower market share than that. And I think that what helped Uber to continue to gain market share across the globe. And it was difficult for competitors to compete with that particular mentality. And I would say one of the thing about Uber's success is that mindset, the winning mindset, that we are not satisfied until we have that 70% market share in that particular market. A lot of the time, the operational teams will come back to us, hey, it's not sustainable to gain 70% market share in that particular market. And the pricing is not sustainable, because if you lower the prices, then drivers won't make money. But we are never satisfied with that particular answer. Our thought process was, if we lower the prices more, then drivers can make more trip, and it will continue to accelerate your flywheel. And eventually you can get that 70% market share in every city that we operate into.
Yeah, because I can't really think of any SaaS companies that even have 70% market share. Like I'm sure Salesforce has a really high one for CRMs, but I mean, especially in horizontal software, and this is why I love talking about business models with people. Like in horizontal software, if you're in the teens, that's remarkable. In vertical software, maybe like a MindBody for gyms has over 50%. Maybe like an ACV auctions has a high percent for automotives. But I mean, 70%, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's correct, CJ. But we were able to get away with it, CJ, also because our TAM, if you think about our TAM, it was personal vehicle ownership and also public transportation. So yes, 70% market share from the ride sharing companies, but in a grand scheme of things, we also thought that not only we have to gain that market share of 70%, but we need to continue to expand our TAM within that market.
Totally, totally. Hey, I'm thinking a lot about retention right now. Did you measure retention on both sides for drivers and for passengers?
Yes, we were focused on retention on both riders and drivers. And in fact, our financial models were built on the both sides. So we'll have a model built on the rider retention curves, and we'll also have the model built on driver retention curves. And while our rider retention was quite high, as I mentioned, almost every rider will come back, or even if they don't come back, the existing rider will continue to take more and more trips over a period of time. Our driver were churning much faster because there was a set of drivers who will be on the platform for a long period of time, but there are also a lot of casual drivers on the platform, and they'll drive with us for a couple of months, and then when they are in between the jobs, but then they will leave to start their full-time jobs, etc. So our driver churn was very, very high.
How did you square drivers that were doing gigs for multiple companies like Uber and Lyft or DoorDash and Uber Eats?
Yeah, ultimately, our thought was the drivers will go to the platform where they get the most business. And
Sure.
that's the whole pricing strategy that we followed. That hey, if we keep our pricing as low as possible than compared to any of the competitor, then we'll have more and more rides on the platform. And if we have more and more rides on the platform, it gives much more incentive for the driver to stay with our platform and make more money on the platform. Ultimately, what matters the most to the driver is where they are making the most money. And they can only make the money on the platform where the most riders are. So our whole focus was how we can continue to bring more and more riders on the platform. So that was one thing. But the other thing was we also started some customer loyalty programs for the drivers.
Sure.
We will give them more and more benefits, like you will see in many of the industries like hotels and airline industries. So we started those kind of programs as well for the drivers. And finally, we also will, in a very competitive phase, we'll also supplement that with the driver incentives in terms of onboarding new drivers, but also providing them some carrots or incentives to stay with our platform for a longer term. So we were playing with multiple strategies to keep the drivers on our platform, but we knew that driver will do a dual apping, and we are comfortable with that. Ultimately,
Yeah.
uh, you can't stop that. What you can stop or what you can do is make sure that your product is amazing, that you have the right incentives for the driver to stay on your platform, and riders or the your eventual customers love your platform.
Yeah, the way to stop it is to give them enough business.
Yes, that's correct.
Well, that dovetails nicely into another question I wanted to ask about your experience. Can you take us through the story of changing Uber's take rate? I imagine a lot of thought went into that.
Yeah, CJ, it was definitely very important for us to change our take rate. When we started the company, our take rate was around 20% or so.
Hmm.
It was clear that for us to reach our long term profitability targets, we have to change our take rate to a much higher number. One thing that we noticed in our data, as I mentioned earlier, that the churn of our drivers was very high. And
Hmm.
that gives us an idea that what if, and the issue of changing the take rate from 20% to 25% was what if all of our drivers churn away and go to the
Yeah.
competitor platform? Because at that point of time, we are not the only platform, we are competing with a lot of different players. And while we are playing with the position of strength, there was always a risk that what if you lose your drivers as you change your take rate? But when we look into the data of driver churn, what we thought it would be a good idea that we grandfather our old drivers to 20% take rate while we start onboarding our new drivers to 25% take rate. And as your old driver churn away, eventually in let's say next few years or so, all your drivers or most of your drivers will be at 25% take rate.
It solves itself over time.
Yes, that's exactly correct. That it solved itself over the time. But also, what we did to onboard those new drivers at 25%, we gave them much more incentives for a short period of time so that they were not feeling that they are at loss compared to the existing drivers on the platform. So, by doing those multiple things, both for existing drivers and the new drivers, we're eventually able to move all of our drivers to that long term take rate of 25% eventually.
This is dynamic. It's like water. It moves a lot. Because the other route you could have taken was to just increase prices overall, which would be, I guess, passed on to the end consumer and then keep your take rate the same. But there's probably a consideration around that.
I think that's the question that most consumer companies struggle with, whether it's Amazon or Apple, that how much you want to pass on your prices to end consumer versus kind of squeeze it from your suppliers. But in my mind, I think your first focus should be how you provide the most value to your customers, and that's how the Walmart is making the most revenue in the world, because ultimately you need to provide that value to the customers. And our biggest value among other things to the customer was our prices were around 30 to 40% cheaper than taxi, and we never wanted to lose that value proposition. And we knew from our data that the drivers, while we had a high churn rate of drivers, we were also able to onboard new drivers very, very effectively and frequently. And that gave us confidence that it's okay to, uh, for example, in this particular case, keep our prices lower on the consumer side while increasing our take rate for the drivers.
That totally makes sense. And I think every good marketplace has an inherent tilt to it where you probably lean in more to one side and making it more user friendly to that side. And it sounds like Uber, like at all costs, we have to preserve this 30 to 40% discount for the end consumer, or else we're not going to have customers for the drivers to drive around.
Yeah, but eventually, CJ, and you'll notice now that Uber has such a good pricing power because
Yeah.
they have the market leadership position, and in most of the market, there are only two players here now, Uber and Lyft. And Uber, in most cases, I'm not looking into the latest data, but Uber will have 70 to 80% market share. So now they have that position of strength, and they can eventually have the pricing power as well because the customer love the product and there are very few alternative to the product. So eventually, I think that is true for any of the consumer product, including Tesla or Apple, where you have moved the market, where you have won the customer loyalty, where you have invested in creating that amazing product and experience, and now you have that pricing power to continue to increase your margins.
I definitely felt that recently on a trip where I got off the plane in Logan Airport in Boston, and the Uber, I think it was like $5 more expensive than what I estimated the taxi to be. So I was like, oh, this has come full circle here. Hey, I want to touch next on your experience at Poshmark. That was a wild ride. If I have it right, it was quite the financial roller coaster there, and you had a big turnaround before IPO. Maybe you could just speak to your mindset of how to change the financial profile at large.
Yeah, Poshmark was very interesting and also an amazing business run by an amazing founder. And we were having a lot of competition during that time. Because of success of Uber, a lot of people start believing in this new innovative marketplaces. And starting this second-hand marketplace was also a big idea during the time. And for us to differentiate, when I joined the company, it was very clear that we need to think about our unit economics because when I joined the company, we had very low gross margin, around 30 to 40%. And it was clear to me from my experience at Uber that if you want to invest in growth, you have to invest in acquiring new customers, promotion, incentives, etc. And you can't do that until you have the right unit economics, the right gross margins. So the first thing that we focused on was increasing our gross margins. And we did that by changing our shipping structure at that point of time. And what was happening, if you think from customer perspective, let's say you are buying a Louis Vuitton bag on Poshmark. Usually that bag is around $2,000 or so, but in Poshmark, you're able to buy it around $500 to $1,000 because it's a resale bag. Now you are getting huge value in the transaction from $2,000 to, let's say, $500. So it's a big saving to the consumer. And in the grand scheme of things, saving $1 or $2 of shipping, that the subsidy that we are providing to the customer does not matter that much. But it was big dent on our unit economics. So we optimized some of that shipping subsidy that we are providing to our customers, and we were able to fix our gross margin. Of course, we took some other initiatives as well, but that was a big lever to increase our gross margin. And once we fixed our gross margin, we had much more lever in terms of our LTV to CAC to invest on acquiring more and more customers. So that was definitely the one area that we focused a lot on.
That's really smart. It's like, let's do the basic things right. Let's have a strong gross margin profile, and then there'll be more that we can spend on OpEx, which will get the flywheel going for sales and marketing.
Yes, that's exactly correct. And we started investing, broadening our channels as well. So initially we were focused on a couple of channels, but after we are much more comfortable in terms of our unit economics, we are able to expand into many channels and acquire customers very rapidly. Also, one thing which was very interesting at Poshmark and very different than Uber, at Uber, we had to invest on both sides of the marketplace in terms of we were investing in acquiring riders separately and we are investing in acquiring drivers separately. But in Poshmark case, I as a user, I'm a both buyer and seller on the platform because I want to buy a Louis Vuitton bag, but I also have that closet. And
Right.
in that closet, I can sell my stuff as well. So in our case, in Poshmark case, we had to acquire on acquiring users, and that's how we initially, when we are thinking about Poshmark, we thought from buyer and seller perspective, but we changed it fundamentally to think from a user perspective. That let's acquire the user, and that user will eventually become your buyer and will also eventually become your seller, and that gives us much better unit economics to invest into acquiring that user because that user is more valuable to us because
More than twice as valuable.
Yes, that's correct.
That's an amazing insight. I think that's also a great sign of product market fit for a marketplace, right, Kapil? If a user wants to be both a buyer and a seller.
And that's how we were also able to differentiate on a lot of other transactional marketplaces. For example, the Real or TradeUp or Mercaris of the world, because in their case, they were not thinking it from a social marketplace. So we position ourselves from a transactional marketplace to a social marketplace because of this dynamic that we have to acquire one user, and that user can be both buyer and seller on the platform. And also the other interesting part of our business was the engagement of user on our platform was very high. And it was very similar to the engagement of users on Facebook or Instagrams of the world. Average user on our platform was spending around 20 to 25 minutes on the platform. And that gives us encouraging sign that we can invest much more than the normal unit economics because there may be a way for us to monetize those users' engagement later in the life cycle of the business.
Just to back up, they were spending 20, 25 minutes a day?
Yes, that's correct. It's a very addictive app. And I don't know whether you have used CJ or...
One of my sisters was both a buyer and a seller on Poshmark, so I know about it.
Yeah, so CJ, Poshmark now, I believe, have around 80 to 90 million registered or active users on the platform, which is almost, and majority, lot of those are women. So I won't be surprised if almost half of the women in the US are on the platform, and they are so addictive and they use it on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, like in Uber's case, a lot of the riders are weekly active users or monthly active users, but it sounds like at Poshmark, they were daily active users.
Yes, that's exactly correct. So it's almost similar to the social platform and all the dynamics of the app. For example, liking, sharing, following, all of those features were very similar in terms of what you will see in any of the social platform.
Were there any other pivotal decisions? So the shipping impacted gross margin. What else allowed you to make that transition?
Yeah, the other thing, as I mentioned, was move from transactional platform to more of a social commerce platform. And we changed all of our financial model rather than looking into buyer cohort and a seller cohort, we started looking into the user cohort. And that fundamentally changed the way we look into our product and all the investment decisions. And for example, the North Star metric that we're thinking about at Poshmark were monthly active users rather than monthly active buyers or monthly active sellers that you'll normally see in any of the marketplace business.
Can you say more about that? So you just cared about that they were doing something. It wasn't so much that they were one side or the other.
While we'll also look into the details, for example, what those users are doing in platform in terms of buying pattern or seller pattern, but a lot of the focus was on looking into acquiring those users, and that definitely was our North Star metric. And a lot of the decisions were based on uh, maximizing that North Star metric. But of course, we'll also focus on the monetization of those users. So yes, monthly active user will be our North Star metric, but we'll also closely look into the monetization of those active users on the platform.
Got it. Got it. And so we have the context of the journey of changing take rate at Uber. How did you think about take rate in your business model at Poshmark?
At Poshmark, our philosophy was we want to keep it very consistent and simple. And that was one of the fundamental drivers in our decision making at Poshmark. We like to see things very, very simple and consistent. And if you think about a lot of other e-commerce marketplaces, let's say eBay or Etsy, Etsy has a marketplace, it has a take rate of around 5%, and they make a lot of their revenue through the other services that they provide to their sellers. For eBay, their take rate varies from different categories, whether it's a fashion category or electronics category. But
I've seen the grid. It's actually really confusing depending on what you're selling, and it's a huge margin depending if it's auto parts or shoes.
Yes, that's correct. And if you think about both Etsy, which is a low take rate, but they're making money through other ways, and similarly eBay, which are mostly making money through take rate, but it's very different for different product categories. But we did not want that. We wanted simplicity and consistency. And take rate at Poshmark was 20% to start with when I joined the company. I believe that when we started the company, the take rate was around the same, and it remained the same still, I believe, as of today. So we followed that value that we had, that hey, we want to keep our take rate very consistent and very simple. But the good thing about Poshmark was when we started the business, we thought about that long-term unit economics, and we started with that 20% take rate. There are a lot of the companies, for example, they started with a lower take rate that eventually will increase that over a long period of time. And Mercari, for example, did that in the US, and they continue to get a lot of struggle with their sellers that, hey, why you are increasing our take rate? So in Poshmark case, having that long-term vision and then having that consistency and simplicity helped us to keep that take rate at the same level.
That totally checks out. There's this grid that I've seen a million times. It's like basically tattooed in my brain, and it's the frequency of transaction and then the transaction price. And like the golden quadrant is the top right, if people can visualize it, where you're a high velocity of transactions, users buy quite frequently, but it's also a higher ticket price. I'd imagine that you also looked at like what's our average sale, and then how often are people buying, and then that helps us inform what our take rate can be.
Yes, that's correct. And CJ, Uber is a great example where frequency and take rate are in a great spot in the top quadrant because people are using the product on a weekly basis.
Right.
Take rate is now around 25 to 30%. So it's a golden business. Similarly, Facebook, for example, people are using the companies are using the product for marketing on a daily basis, and ultimately it's a duopoly between Facebook and Google, and then they can command the take rate they want for that particular business.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are multiple ways to skin the cat, but then like on the opposite side of the spectrum, you may have something like a Redfin or a Zillow. Like how often do you buy a house? And you have to remember that this platform is there each time you sell the house, and then they have a lower take rate but applied to a much larger purchase.
Yes, that's exactly correct, CJ.
I want to talk about Outschool now. So if I have it right, that's a marketplace business model too, right?
Yes, that's a marketplace business, and we offer live classes to K-12 students globally. We have around 5 to 10,000 amazing teachers on our platform. And my daughter, for example, is taking chess class on the platform. My son is taking math class on the platform, and we cater to the needs of homeschoolers, one-on-one tutoring, and also small group classes. So it's an amazing platform and very close to my heart in terms of the mission it has to offer.
So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of a marketplace model or a transaction based model now that we've gone through three different companies here versus pure play SaaS? Do you think about that often?
Yeah, definitely. I do think about it often. In fact, at Outschool, we have continued to think about whether to move from transaction-based model to a subscription-based model. And while there are some benefits, and let me talk about some of the benefits of
Yeah, sure.
the market transaction based model. With the transaction based model, you have much more leverage in terms of price differentiation, especially from the consumer side. Let's say search pricing at Uber, every customer is getting a different pricing at a different point of time, and that gives you a lot of pricing power. While if you're and that's an amazing lever that you can take, but also on the flip side, there's so much volatility because of this transaction based model. The customers is never logged in, and customer need to fundamentally love your product for a long period of time to stick to the platform. And there's so many competitors, so many changes happening in the world that you have to deal with it. The second is seasonality. In a transaction based model, there are inherent seasonality. For example, the e-commerce businesses, they peak in Q4, and 30 to 40% of those businesses are in Q4, but those customers are not there in Q2, where in the summertime they go away. So there's so much volatility, and it's hard to because of this retention issue and seasonality issue. It's very you need to be very focused on how you make investment and change those investment decisions over a period of time to drive the growth in the business.
That's an excellent segue because I'm wondering how capital allocation plays a role in all of this.
CJ, as far as the capital allocation is considered, there are different level of pyramids where I think about making those decisions. At a highest level, you have to think about how much capital or how much runway you have so that you can make those kind of investment in the business on an annual basis or on a longer term. But on the other side, you also have to think about the right strategic goals that you have for the company, whether you are thinking about growing at this point of time or you are moving more towards profitability. To give you an example, during COVID time, most of the companies are focused much more on the growth. But when then in the last couple of years, a lot of the levers have been shifted towards driving the company towards profitability. So yes, when you think about capital allocation, you have to start with your runway. You have to start thinking about your strategic goals, whether it's growth versus profitability. But after that, it all boils down to some of the golden metrics that you use. And some of the metrics that you might have think from a SaaS perspective, the rule of 40, I think that's a metric that we also like to use in our marketplace businesses, that you are trying to optimize that rule of 40 in terms of thinking about whether to invest in growth versus profitability so that you can continue to move towards that rule of 40 eventually. And then there are functional levers or the functional metrics that you use to think about the capital allocation. And some of the metrics that have come very handy to me is revenue per head count. I believe that anything north of 500 K per employee is a good metric for the marketplace business. You also think about LTV to CAC in terms of marketing investment. And then for rest of the functions, you think about ROI and you compare it with what kind of payback you are comfortable with in that particular capital investment decision. Some companies, some decisions will be a long-term payback, but some decisions will be a shorter-term payback.
That's an amazing framework, and I couldn't agree with you more. I actually call revenue per employee the GOAT of all SaaS metrics, or the greatest of all time, because it cuts through all the noise, right? Like you're either producing it or you're not. Have you ever thought about combining models at Outschool? I often think like, wouldn't the best of both worlds be, especially from a capital allocation perspective, is if you had this recurring revenue, which was subscription fee plus reoccurring, which is transaction on top of it?
You exactly took all the thought from my mind, CJ, as well. Because if you think about Amazon Prime or Dash Pass, I think that's the golden nugget for any of the businesses from my perspective. Where Amazon Prime, for example, they have $150 a year of prime fee, and that's the way for you to lock in the customer for a long period of time. And then after that, the customers are buying on a frequently, and you're making money for each of those transactions. So you're taken care of the retention and volatility of the business, but also you have now price flexibility and earning for each of the transaction from the customer. Similarly, Dash Pass, I think from my perspective, why DoorDash has won the market is because of that amazing product Dash Pass. I use Dash Pass, and now because of that Dash Pass, I'm not going to Uber Eats or other platform at this point of time. And yes, eventually, if we can implement the same model for Outschool, that will be holy grail for us as well.
I never thought about the lock-in part. Like I thought about the predictability of the revenue, but to your point, you're basically capturing their mind share too.
Yeah, because the customer won't like that I have three different subscriptions. Let's say I'm on an Amazon Prime subscription. It's very hard for me to now buy multiple subscription of, let's say, Walmart or Target if they offer the same. And I would go and buy the subscription of the product that I love. And once I have buying the subscription, if there is not a very strong reason for me to leave that subscription, I will stick with it for a long, long period of time. And that gives Amazon a great power to continue to make investment for a longer term, because they know that the customer has been logged in and I can sell them multiple things over and over again.
Right. The retention on the reoccurring is stronger because you have that recurring revenue stream. That's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about decision making for a bit. I love how we teed it up with capital allocation frameworks there. But more broadly, I'm curious, would you agree that the higher up you get in an organization, the more you as a leader are judged on the quality of your decisions, and less so about like the hours or how hard you work?
Well, at a very high level, I believe that is true. But it is also true that you can only arrive at those high quality decisions by the hard work that you put in to arrive at those decisions, because those hard decisions are not easy on a surface or from an external perspective. Those decisions look simple at the end of it, but there's so much work that has gone behind the background to come to that high quality decisions. So from my perspective, yes, as a leader you are accountable for that high quality decisions, but there's so much work that goes into background to create those high quality decisions. Decision making is complex, and leaders need to make those hard choices. But also, what becomes important and critical is whether you are effectively able to execute those decisions or not. How you get buy in, how you think about the dynamicity of the decision, how do you think about multiple stakeholders when you are making those decisions is also very, very important. So, for example, if you go back to that Uber's example, changing the take rate from 20% to 25% was an important and critical decision. And yes, Travis as a CEO should be accountable and judged based on that decision. But coming to that decision was not that easy. It was looking at a lot of data, understanding a lot of dynamics that was involved in coming to that decision. But also was critical that how you roll out the decision. And I think the successful rollout of the decision what led to a great outcome for us rather than the decision itself.
Absolutely. So I wanted to flag something that you said at the start of that, and that was you can't make great decisions if you aren't putting in the hard work. It's not like you can separate the two, because decisions are usually arrived at because you have some sort of earned secret that you've learned along the way because you've put in the hours. So I totally agree with that. And then the second point there, it sounds like you're hinting at that you have to be pretty decisive when you make it. And also, I guess, you have to lean into the implementation to make sure it happens.
Yes, agree, CJ. You need to be decisive for sure. You have to, a lot of the time, there's so many choices and options in front of you that you have to make the decision and you have to commit to the decision. I think the implementation process can be much more iterable and can be worked on. But as far as the decision making is considered, you have to be very, very decisive. And I'll give another example. In our case, in Poshmark case, we knew that we want to be a public company in the next 2 years. That was a decision that we took, and we committed to that decision. But now, what the path to that IPO could look like could be much more of an iterative process, depending on the market conditions and how the business is evolving. Another example is going international expansion. At both at Poshmark and Outschool, we committed to that international expansion. And you have to commit to international expansion because you don't have data, you don't have a lot of information as you're taking that leap of faith to going to the international market. But after looking into a lot of information or data, you arrive at that decision. You have to be very decisive and you have to commit to that decision because it's not a short term investment, it's a long term investment. But you can be iterable, you can iterate on it how you go about with that international expansion, whether you tackle one country at a time or multiple countries at a time, how much investment you make in that particular country, that can be much more iterable.
And I think that's where people get hung up. They feel like they have to have everything basically fully baked before they jump in and make the decision. But what you're saying, if I have it right, is you should be firm about the decision, but less so about the path that you iterate to get there.
Yes, that's correct, CJ.
Another decision-making question, or maybe it's really a hiring question, deciding who to hire. You as a leader, would you rather to hire someone who does a lot of things really well or a few things exceptionally well?
That's a tough one, CJ. And I may not have a very straightforward answer for you, CJ, here, but it depends on function to function, CJ. From my perspective, let's say there are functions where you need more raw horsepower, you need much more whiteboard thinking. And in that particular case, for example, functions like corporate development, pricing, strategic finance, and in that particular case, I lean much more on raw horsepower and looking for people who can put their things in multiple areas. Because when you are building the company, you don't know what kind of problems that you'll tackle next. Let's say, for example, in Uber's case, we were big in Uber X. And when I joined, we did not know that we will be launching Uber Pool and Uber Eats. But it was important that I can extend my area of focus from Uber X to also to other areas of product. So it was necessary that I have that skill set to take my experience and expertise to multiple different domains. But let's say, for example, you are going public and you want to hire you at that point of time you have to hire for specific roles. For example, SEC focus role or SOX focus role. And in that particular case, I look for people with domain expertise. So I think there are areas where I'm much more focused on people who can operate at a whiteboard, much more strategic thinking, and can be molded into different ways. But there are some areas where I'm looking for much more of domain expertise.
Yeah, sometimes you're really truly just sizing up the size of the engine because you can apply it to anything. And it's really about how good are you at solving problems, less so what the problem is. But sometimes it truly is about what the problem is at hand. I'm going to take you into what we call our long ass lightning round. So you're a successful guy, but I ask everybody on the show, you got to give me one thing you've messed up in your career. It could be this job or a different one.
There are many examples, CJ, but one that comes to my mind, given a lot of focus on Uber in our conversation, is we did a nationwide price cut back in 2016, and we got a lot of data and inputs from the local operations team that this could be a big dent on our drivers. But still, even after looking to the data, we went ahead with that large scale price cut, and there's so much hue and cry from the drivers, and it was a good lesson learned that you have to be empathetic. You need to take multiple stakeholders into account, and before making your decisions.
Do you think that the mistake was the communication of the decision, or do you think it was the decision itself, like it just didn't make business sense?
I would say rather than the decision itself, the way we could have rolled out that particular decision, we could have, rather than rolling it out nationally, maybe there was a path where we could roll that out city by city and state by state. So I think a lot of the time, again, going back to our thought process about, hey, yes, we wanted to be decisive. That was a good decision. But how do you implement? Can you be much more iterable in implementing those decisions?
There we go. We tied it back. I love that. Next one. If you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
A lot of things, again, but one thing that comes to mind is it's all about people. It's all about people. People do business with people. And I think if I go back to my younger self, I would love to continue to build on that relationship for a long, long period of time. So that is one thing that I'll definitely give my longer self. And also think long term. I think it's very, very important. A lot of the time we get bogged down into the details in the short term, what's happening in our lives or in our businesses. But if you think a very long term perspective, everything seems very different and you can make much better decisions.
Yeah. Do you feel there were points in your career where you were myopically focused on the now, like what's happening this quarter?
Definitely. There were times, CJ, especially when you run a public company, it becomes
Right.
hard to focus on long term. But I think the amazing public companies are also, they, they are not bothered by the short term volatility of their stock price, but continue to think about how they continue to invest in building the best product for the customers for a long period of time.
I love that. More of a technical one. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools do you use at Outschool to get the job done and the books closed?
We have very simple finance stack, CJ, at Outschool. We use NetSuite, like most of the companies in our scale. We also use we recently acquired. Recently started using Livfin for revenue recognition, and also we use Bill.com and Expensify for APAR and expense management. But again, not spilling the bean too soon, we might consider Ramp, which is one of the amazing product run by amazing founder, to think about the next phase of our journey.
Yeah. And you mentioned Leapfin, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, they're a friend of the pod. That's awesome. Last one I got for you. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
Lyft ride. But it was intentional. So when I was at Uber, we were incentivized sometime to take a Lyft ride and expense it so that we can go through the competitor experience and learn from it. So I think that was
Right.
amazing. A lot of the companies discourage taking the competitor using the competitor product, but in our case, it was encouraged, and a lot of people will use to expense that.
That's amazing. Okay. Yeah, you make sure it was market research and not just an employee being lazy.
Yeah.
Kapil, this has been an absolute blast. I've long looked up to the companies that you've worked at, Uber, Poshmark, Outschool. So this was truly a bucket list interview for me.
Thank you, CJ. I totally enjoyed this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.